Okay, good morning. We'll get started now. Um, I'll call to order the public roundtable on privately operated sports wagering proposed rules. Today's date is June 9th, um, 2022. The time is 10:01 a.m. This public roundtable is taking place at the Office of Lottery and Gaming headquarters located at 2235 Shannon Place, Southeast, Washington, D.C. My name is Peter Alvarado. I am the Director of Regulation and Oversight here at the Office of Lottery and Gaming. And welcome. This is one in a series of public roundtables. The purpose of these roundtables is to solicit comment that the Office of Lottery and Gaming may consider in drafting amendments to the privately operated sports wagering rules. Um, Please note that today's meeting is being recorded as well as live streamed. Um, to provide a little context to today's proceeding, the current rules were adopted and published in August of 2019. Since that time, we have licensed 3 operators, over 10 suppliers, and issued approximately 300 occupational licenses. The occupational licenses being the employees of the operator suppliers and management service providers. Um, with this experience, we are looking to propose amendments to the rules later this year. As part of the process, we decided to hold these roundtables to receive comment from the public that we may consider in drafting the proposed rules. When we do issue the proposed rules, we will again provide the public the opportunity to comment on them prior to final adoption. At this time, I just want to do a little introductions of the panel that's up here at the main table. Directly to my right is Ridgely Bennett, who is the Chief Legal Counsel for the Office of Lottery and Gaming. Next to him is Tyrone Hankerson, who is the Manager of Compliance and Enforcement for the District of Columbia's Department of Small and Local Business Development. And to his right is Luis Rendon. He is the Investigations and Enforcement Officer for the Regulation and Oversight Division. And at the far right is Bert Foster, who is the Audit and Compliance Officer for the Regulation and Oversight Division. So before we get started, we have today three individuals who are going to provide testimony, and just some of the format. I'll call each person up one at a time, and as you come up, please state your name, your position, and if you represent a company, let us know the name of the company you're representing. Your testimony will be limited to 10 minutes, and we will give you a sort of a 1-minute warning when you get near the 9 minutes. But after your testimony, please stay up at the podium as the panel here may ask some questions, some back and forth questions. And if after you've completed your testimony, if you could stay in the room until the end, because at the end we may have some questions for some of you as we gain testimony, hear different views and stuff. We may have some questions. So with that, let me call the first speaker up. That would be Robert Warren.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Robert Warren Jr. I'm the president of RLW Solutions, LLC. Um, Again, good morning. I'm Robert Warren, and I represent RLW Solutions, LLC, a district-based, resident-owned gaming industry consultancy firm. Thank you for allowing me time to speak today. My comment is in reference to Title 30, District of Columbia Municipal Regulation 2124, Operations, Process, and Procedures Audit Requirement. Specifically, DCMR 2124.1, which states operators and management service providers, prior to commencing sports betting operations and by June 1st, each subsequent year, shall have their control systems audited by an independent licensed audit agent approved by the office. Sports wagering operators and management service providers are responsible for forwarding the results of this audit to the office. Unlike the financial audits of DCMR 2123, which would require a CPA, or the technical audits of DCMR 2125, which could be interpreted to require expertise specific to a gaming or testing laboratory. The operations process and procedure audit of DCMR 2124 require an expertise that doesn't necessarily warrant any specific license or certification. The recommendation of RLW Solutions LLC is to amend the language in 2124.1 to reflect an office approved audit agent instead of a licensed audit agent. That's it.
And so, just so I understand it, you would your recommendation is that in section 2124.1 that we change the language to an office approved, and your rationale for that is that you want someone that the office considers to be either an expert or somebody specialized in this field.
Correct. Because that specific section involves the internal control audit, house rules audit, security and surveillance plans, those being audited don't necessarily require an individual with a specific license or certification. You can have expertise, i.e., you've been in the game 10 plus, 5 plus years, been a regulator and an operator, and you have the expertise to conduct the audit, but there is no actual certification that I have, i.e., a CPA. Um, and the regulation specifically says in all of the sections, licensed audit agent. So my recommendation is if the OLG would consider removing in that specific section licensed and just leaving in an office approved audit agent, it would open the door up for individuals with that expertise to be able to conduct those audits as a part of their offering.
And if we were to do that, um, what and you may have sort of, and as you've somewhat indicated a little bit, what would you believe the qualifications for the office to use to approve somebody to do that audit? What is it that they have 10 years of experience, 5 years of experience, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean that's a great question. I would say it'd be a combined maybe experience. We look at the resume to see what the experience actually is. Again, there are individuals who served as internal audits for gaming companies, but again, an internal audit, you're just an individual who is labeled an auditor. You don't necessarily have a certification. So the office could consider, what the title of the individual was and their experience. In the case of some individuals, they're prior regulators and they have done this task as a normal duty. And again, but there's no necessary license or certification that they got. So I would think that the office could put together some sort of continuum that would, take into account experience and your prior positions and whatnot, in order to determine if the individual is suitable to take out the task, to carry on the task.
So you would like us to get rid of the requirement to have a licensed auditor to do it. I mean, wouldn't it be better for us to take the other tack and say a licensed auditor that is approved by the office? And that way you have both somebody who is licensed and familiar with doing audit reports, and they've been approved based on their qualifications in the gaming industry.
The reason I recommend taking licensed audit agent out for that specific section is, again, there is no specific license or certification that an expert needs when reviewing internal controls, house rules, security and surveillance plans. That's specific um, to occupational experience, as opposed to doing financial audits or even the testing laboratory technical audits, where they're specific to certain certifications and certain licenses. So just in that specific section, I would just recommend removing that and then allowing the office to just be able to utilize its authority to approve an individual agent as worthy to carry out the task.
Great, great.
Would you say that those people should have to obtain a supplier license or an occupational license of some sort so that we know who the people are and we've done some type of licensing and background check on them?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, great. Thank you. It's let me just refer to my panel here. Does anyone else have any questions or comment?
What kind of report do you foresee your company producing if this were to be changed? Would it be an official report from the company with a letterhead, or what's the affirmation that has been proven correct?
I mean, they could produce an audit report. I'm just specifically saying that the audit agent need not be licensed as far as having a license that in the industry really doesn't exist for this particular task.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from the panel?
I think with Ridgely's question of asking about either being supplier or occupationally licensed, it does answer that question. So if the business owner would agree to that, then that would meet a requirement that OLG has.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Next up, I'd like to call, looks like Nicholas Kennedy.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak. My name is Nicholas Kennedy. I'm the CEO and founder of SWX Technologies. We are a local DC technology provider. We are CBE certified. We are a small business startup. And the purpose of me coming to speak to you today and testifying is to hopefully give you the point of view or the perspective of a local startup in this business, which I think goes to the spirit of the law that was created back in 18 and 19, which is to promote local businesses entering the sports wagering industry. So hopefully my comments complement those of some of the larger foreign publicly traded companies that have come into DC. So you can hear this perspective of a local tech provider. We do plan on, we are currently undergoing BMM certification. So we hope to have GLI 33 certification very soon. On the advice of counsel, we've waited to apply for our supplier license until we get that, because we obviously want to have that before we apply. So that's a little bit of background on us. Generally, I understand that there are limitations on what you can do in the rulemaking due to statutory limitations. So the difference between rulemaking and statutory. Throughout my comments, I might touch upon statutory issues. So, but it's just to give you background and perspective. So I understand things like that can't change, but maybe we can come up with ideas that are workaround solutions in the rules. I think that looking at Title 30 and the mix, I think there's generally, I think you've heard a lot of comments from previous speakers about the difference between Class A and Class B, and maybe taking a perspective on that Class A's in looking at what has happened in the industry in terms of Class A's partnering with large foreign publicly traded companies, and then Class B's having a little bit more difficulty, right? You've had one Class B approval in a few years. And in my experience, being a tech provider and a potential supplier, talking with a lot of the businesses, the reality is that the finances don't necessarily work out, right? And sports wagering is a volume business. The theoretical margin on a sports wager is 4.55%, right? And so when you look at those margins, you have to do volume. And the way that Class Bs are operated are brick and mortar. Class Bs cannot operate, like GameBet or Intralot, or in terms of having access to the full market. They can only have access to the participants who come to their location. So right off the bat, the nature of the law, the nature of the regulations limit the handle that any Class B can do. So when they look at the finances of their business, and they look at, the fees involved, what potential profit they can make, the tax involved on GGR, and then all of the compliance costs that go into the mix and into the Title 30, they just don't add up. And that's been my experience in looking at it from that small business perspective. And so a lot of my comments go to that, the underlying notion that, and this is just an idea, but the underlying notion that the mix applies to large, foreign, companies, and it also applies to small businesses. So the standards are the same for Caesars, for Game Bet, and all of the PointsBet, all of the large companies in this business. And I think we all understand that in this industry, there's roughly 5 or 6 major companies, and not much else beyond that. So I think in looking at that, in looking at the mix, there might be an opportunity to differentiate between small businesses, CBEs, Class Bs, suppliers that are smaller in size, and then using some common sense regulatory rules that would permit an easier entry for some of the small businesses. So let me give you a few examples. In 2120.4 and 5, in section 16 of the mix, which goes to geolocation services. I don't know if you know, but geolocation services the competition in that industry is limited. It's really just one company so far, which is GeoComply. And the reality is that the services that they offer are really made for large businesses, that are doing statewide, commerce. They're not really meant for brick and mortar locations. So we are a mobile only, technology, which I think I've heard you in previous panels say that there's a lower bar in terms of risk than cash or kiosk, and that's great. But the reality is that some of the costs involved in mobile only are much higher, and so GeoComply is a almost cost prohibitive technology for a Class B or CBE. And the reality, and so thinking through that from a common sense perspective, this is just an idea. You have a brick and mortar location by statute and by regulation. A Class B can only operate in that location. Well, fire codes and just basic common sense says that there's a limit to how many people can be in that location at one time. So when you look at the mix, section 16 specifically, it goes through all of these things as if it was a statewide regulation or statewide mobile app. But if you think about it, there are technologies that can say, well, if you only have 200 or 300 active users at one time, and let's say that location can only handle 200 or 300, if you had 1,000 active users, you would know that something has gone wrong, that there are too many people betting in your location, right? And so if you look at BMM standards or the GLI 33 standards, they don't even, they would permit Wi-Fi, right? Like they would permit certain technologies that right now I don't think the mix would permit. If you look at specifically, I think it's, essentially what you want to look at in terms of the mix is looking through all of the A, B, C, D in the regulations. Can you find something that makes sense for a Class B operator that isn't so heavy, I would say, on the technology? And could there be other solutions that you would permit during the licensing process? I would say that just as another example, sections 18 with AML and with KYC, I think it's really important. These are really important issues, but if you think about it from a common sense standpoint, under section G, it says that you have to use automated services, and we would use like LexisNexis or any other, standard automated process. But if you look at the kind of reality of AML, we could set standards of lower betting limits, like $500 or something like that. And right off the bat, you're kind of already solving the problem. When you have lower betting limits, you don't really have an AML problem if you're doing a certain, like if there's a threshold in terms of handle per month, because the risk is much lower because there's not as much money going through the app. And then if you look at I think it's subsection I, it talks about the annual independent testing which is, again, a pretty onerous requirement for a small business who's trying to make money in this business, because again, the margins in this are very, very low. So doing things to kind of cut into those margins, I think, undermines the growth of the industry. I think other people have talked about other things like audits, change controls, GLI updates, and annual recertifications, and I think those can all be looked at as well. But I just gave you those two examples because I think they underscore the notion that the mix could be a little bit more, I think, bifurcated in terms of applying for Class B and Class A, or larger companies, or maybe giving CBE exceptions. I will leave you this one idea, and it's just again an idea. There's nothing you can do about the application fees. It doesn't seem like, because those are statutory. There is an idea, though, that on renewal fees, which I think are $50,000 for Class Bs, could it be the case that you offer CBEs or some special status where they can apply the mix regulatory compliance costs against that renewal fee? So meaning, like, if they spent $40,000 in the 5 years, for complying with the mix, they could apply that against the renewal fee. It would be a workaround solution to essentially removing the renewal fee, which I think, when you look at it, $100,000 for Class B and $50,000 for renewals, it becomes very high. So just an idea there. I will say I only have 1 minute left, but I'm glad that DSLBD is here, because I think 2134 of the Title 30, and then Section 316 of the law talks about sports wagering small business development programs. And I think it talks about the office doing recruitment activities, strategies, seminars, procurement opportunities. We haven't quite seen that for CBEs. I think early on, there were a lot of good programs, but lately, I think the last one was in May of 21. And I think the office is also responsible for doing more for CBEs. So I would take a look at Section 316 of the law and see if there are things that OLG can do under 2134 as well. So
Okay, you can go. If you have any last comments, you can
no,
go.
that's it.
Okay.
So I would like to remind everybody that you have an opportunity to submit written comments also.
We will.
So please do that. Do you have the date?
Yeah, the due date on the written comments is June 21st. So there's some.
Yeah,
still
these are
some
just
time.
oral comments. We'll provide written comments as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. I'm sure the panel members do as well. First, on the geolocation. So I understand that you're saying that I think you mentioned the company GeoComply that may be cost prohibitive, but if you use something like Wi-Fi, our concern under the law is that we have to geolocate it and ensure that somebody, let's say, is at restaurant A and they're using the Wi-Fi, that they're not able to walk out, go across the street, get on get in the metro and still continue using the Tibet with that restaurant's platform. And so if you use Wi-Fi, I mean, is it you think it will be able to still meet the requirement that you stay within? And we're probably going to be issuing shortly some geolocation standards for Class Bs, and it's going to say it'll have some buffer zone. Geolocation is not an exact science, so to speak. But does Wi-Fi, or are there other low-cost solutions that you think would work?
So we've developed a low-cost solution because the geolocation services that were on the market were too expensive. So we use beacons on entry and exits. But again, we had to develop that ourselves because of the current mix. There are other, if you look at what BMM and GLI 33 says, they have a whole host of different technologies that you can use to do this. And their testing probably is a lower bar than what OLG will set for during the application process. I think it goes to the point I was just trying to make in terms of taking a common sense approach.
Mhm.
Yes, spoofing, yes, device integrity, all those are important and we will comply. But I think the issue is giving a privately run sports book the opportunity to monitor its own active users. And if you have without having market research and essentially market or proof of concept, you're essentially doing a cash outlay for something that you don't even know will work in terms of the finances. So for instance, if you only have 30 active users at one time, you can monitor that. And by just looking around or whatever, how many people roughly are in your bar.
Hmm.
You see what I'm saying? If you have a fire code of 500 people and you have 10,000 users, something's wrong, right? And so I think by starting with a very high bar, and then it really disincentivizes market entry for small businesses or Class B applicants. I'm just giving you the kind of feedback that we have, where if you start with a lower bar and then raise that bar during compliance checks or the annual reviews, or just letting it see how it works out, to me that's a better approach, and it allows the small businesses a greater flexibility in terms of finding a solution that works for them.
So DC has very unique geofencing requirements. So we're not just concerned about geofencing within a particular bar, restaurant, or location, but we also have to be cognizant that there are certain areas of the city covered by the Shipstead Loose Act where we can't allow sports betting. And we also have to be concerned with bars and restaurants that are close to the borders of DC, that they're not bleeding over into Maryland or Virginia, or as you said, spoofing. So you're not using that app, in Ohio or somewhere else. How do we protect against that?
Well, I think it's specific to a location. I mean, if you're in a bar on K Street, you don't have any of those problems, right? I mean, you're in the center of the city. You have Wi-Fi that's connected to your location. Like I said, I mean, we've developed our own technologies to try to solve this problem for small businesses, but I don't think we should have had to, right? Like we did it because we were trying to look at the mix and comply. But I think when you look at it from that perspective, you're going to have to, as a regulator, look at each location and say, is this problematic or is it not? If it's not, then I think there should be some flexibility on your part to allow a small business to come up with their own solution that makes sense financially, because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to when you're talking about such a low margin business.
So as sports betting is spreading across the country, are you aware of any other jurisdictions have standards that you think we should look to as model?
Yeah, you guys are unique. DC, I mean, it's serendipitous that we're a DC company, and DC created the most unique law, right? You allow anybody. It's not just a race book, a casino, or anybody. You allow anybody, any business that's not its primary business, to run a sports book.
Right.
I don't know of any jurisdiction that does that.
We are unique.
You are unique, and so I think that spirit of the law should be applied to the rules, which is you're unique. You've created this to let this small business community here flourish and enter the market, and not just have it dominated by foreign companies who are publicly traded, who have billions of dollars and are coming into this market. So I think it should be allowed for small businesses like ours, who are tech providers, licenses, and are really trying to make it and really benefit from the law and the regulation. So I think the regulation should be amended to, or at least take a point of view from that.
Right.
And I think, as I mentioned earlier, and I know I'm out of time, but I'm glad that DSLBD is here. But just one experience like that underscores that is, we're a CBE, we partner with a CBE, but we still had to go through CBE joint venture certification. That's just a statutory thing that DSLBD could not do anything about. But the reality is that two CBEs applying, it should have just been a fast track to be able to say, okay, they're a CBE, they're both certified, let's move on. But because that process was much slower, it kind of indicated that OLG, DSLBD, the city council hadn't really thought of local tech providers being, in this. They really kind of thought, to my opinion, that it was always going to be local bars and restaurants partnering with large foreign companies. And I think if we take a perspective that that's not the case, I think the rules will be much more incentivizing for Class Bs to apply and to flourish.
So my next question may get into things that you consider proprietary or confidential. So if I do, just say I don't
Sure.
know the answer. Is your business model going to be where people can upload cash into an account to play on your app, or is it going to be strictly credit cards and debit cards and other types of payment providers? And this goes into the AML Bank Secrecy Act requirements, where, of course, if you have if somebody has an account and we know who they are and those transactions are going through, that's a lot different than cash transactions.
Yeah, we're an A to Z solution. That's what we want to be. And so we do everything that is industry standard. I mean, our primary probably payment processor will be PayPal, but we'll have others, but they'll all be digital. So it'll be credit card, debit card, things like that. But right now we're going to roll out with PayPal since they're an approved supplier license. But that's what we do. We don't want to be cash. We want to be different in terms of lowering the risk for you guys and be able to say that this is our business models to be digital, mobile, and we don't want to enter the cash business. We want to be different than some of the other Class Bs that exist out there. So we want to be a scalable solution as well. So
Do you know if you'd be able to cash out at those locations, or would it just be digital? And
All
once again,
digital.
if I get
all digital. I mean,
Okay.
I mean that's where the world is going. So we don't have any intentions currently to go cash. If that changes, we'll let you know. But that's not the basis of our current application.
And of course, some of our security standards change based on the fact that it's all mobile only.
We're hoping that's the
there's
case.
no cash, and so you don't have to worry about account room or certain things like that.
We're hoping, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. And again, it's more towards where the world is going and what's a scalable solution for us, and then what could be easily applied to other Class Bs. I mean, we would like to be a service provider for multiple locations and then perhaps other jurisdictions down the line.
Yeah. I think from an AML perspective, I think one of the things we do look at is, we understand that all of you have payment processors. My experiences with some of the payment processors is some of them have outright told me that they don't have AML requirements, that they are not subject to the BSA. So I look at them differently than the payment processor that's telling me we are registered with FinCEN and we have AML requirements, because now I know that they are processing the payments in a manner that's consistent with the BSA. So when I look at who's using that service, it may be a little different than if you're using one that does, because then I'm worried about, well, who's watching the AML compliance at this point? Not that having the payment processor that is FinCEN registered and has not that it completely absolves their client from having it, because you can't delegate that away, but it does play into our analysis of whether there is a sufficient AML program in place. And of course, things like the betting limits, it's all non-cash, and that all plays into consideration as to how the risk and how deep we want or how robust we want the AML program to be.
I agree, and I think that it's incumbent upon us to set our minimum control standards and present them to you during our application process. And if we're using a payment processor like PayPal, they do have systems in place to monitor, but we would have systems in place to monitor that as well. For instance, you're talking about monitoring accounts that open up and close very quickly or don't make a wager, right? Like, you can monitor those, and then I think the regulations say that you have to flag them. If we don't flag them, then we're not in compliance. But if we do flag them, we are in compliance. And the reality is that if we're talking about a low liquidity environment like a brick and mortar location that might only have 20 or 30 users in a single day, you should be able to produce a report at the end of the day to say, were those real users or were they not? Like, that shouldn't be a hard standard to meet. Mm-hmm. And so I just don't want OLG to create a rule such that, it's taken from Nevada, for instance, where they're applying that same standard to, Caesars or Win or MGM that has hundreds of thousands of users per day, right? So I think there is a common sense approach that a small business can monitor and be able to create a minimum internal control standard that meets your requirement, but it's also commensurate with the low liquidity environment that they're operating.
Yeah, that makes sense. Our goal, and when we look at the AML programs, is, and we follow, we take a look at the Bank Secrecy Act, and the Bank Secrecy Act is a risk-based. And so when we're looking at it, we do take a look at what is the risk. As my colleague Ridgely Bennett said earlier, if you have retail, it's a higher risk because you got a lot of cash going through and all that. So, but if it's mobile only, you know, it just is going to require an AML program that's commensurate with the risk.
So can I make a recommendation, which
Mhm.
would be in the mix, and this is what I talk about in terms of bifurcation of the standards, is adding something in there that at the outset, before someone applies, that says, okay, if you're under a betting limit of $500, or if you know, or something like that, then these don't apply. Because what you're doing by setting the mix out right now, every small business who looks at the mix gets fearful and says, I have to comply with these 9 things. That's impossible. Even our attorneys had said, tell me about what you're doing. You know, how are you going to comply with this? OLG really takes a long look at this. If there was something that was public, that was out there right at the beginning that says, hey, if you're under these limits or if you have this common sense approach, then these don't apply, you will see much more interest because they'll know, hey, I can enter this industry. Right now, they look at it and say, I cannot enter this industry because I have to compete against the larger companies. What the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about is that the larger companies, they're competitors to these people. You know, I mean, you've got Virginia that's right across. They are very much competitors, so they are looking at it from a fearful standpoint. So the higher the bar, the regulations, you are just making the competition less and less. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen diminishing interest in it and not as many successful applicants because the mixed standards are so high. They are the same in Nevada, New Jersey, and here in DC. When that's really, like you said, we're unique. We're not the same as those states.
I think that's one of the reasons that we're taking a look at the rules now. Of course, when this all went through, it was several months after the Supreme Court decision really opened this up. And we're now just beginning to see and get a good grasp of what is the market, what is the interest, what can we do to adjust our rules to make it more palatable for smaller businesses while still ensuring the integrity and security of sports wagering in the district.
So that's why I also mentioned 2134, which is the CBE stuff. All the CBE stuff that's mentioned in 2134 is about the application fee, certification of it. It doesn't mention anything about what is actually mentioned in the law under sections 316, which talks about recruitment services, matchmaking, the office shall, you know, I mean, it has requirements in 316 that are nowhere can be found in Title 30.
So generally the rules are for our regulated community and we don't write rules to regulate ourselves, but we are subject to the law that counts.
Well, yeah, and you are kind of an operator as well, right?
Yeah.
You're a regulated operator. So I think it would be in best practice and fair and transparent to say, let's set out some goals or rules under 2134 that help CBEs, not just talk about certification and what the lower number is. Like, you know, set some standards out there that says, hey, these are, because I mean, the law does.
It is
Yeah.
because we contract out
Mhm.
for a sports wagering operator, and that contract is subject to the contracting CBE laws. So it's basically subject to the same set of.
Sure, I'm just
of
saying
laws.
that if you
Yeah.
look at section 316 in
Mhm.
the law, there's nothing actually in the rules that talk about those things that are 316, which I just found to be a little bit missing. It's like just a gap in terms of if it's mentioned in the law but not mentioned in the rules, maybe just take a look at it.
Sure.
Because I think the law was written so that it would help these businesses, and they talk about what the office shall do. So there could be common sense rules. And like I said, I mean, I'm always happy to, give comments or do working groups or things like that. But there are some common sense things that, from my perspective, could be done.
I think it'd be very interested to hear from you because
Yeah.
you're actually out there.
Yeah.
That's different than us trying to figure out what would be helpful for you.
Sure.
If you're telling.
No,
us
and that's
what
what I'm
would be
saying.
helpful.
Like to set that's why this is such a great opportunity, because you're rewriting the rules. And so if you do look at the mix, and just as an example for the AML stuff, putting these things, these disclaimers up front that says, if you do this, it shall not apply. These 9 things shall not apply. I think just, again, I'm giving you a perspective from small business, a tech provider who I don't think there's anyone like us that's a domestic company that's doing this. So I'm just trying to obviously help ourselves, but also help the industry so you see more competition in it.
Oh, I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned, joint ventures with 2 CDs being fast track. What would you imagine that would look like in terms of the certification?
I wouldn't have thought that
process?
we would have to do a joint venture at all. I mean, if you're 2 CBEs and you create a partnership and you want to do it, like let's say, for instance, a Class B, wanted to apply for a Class B license and was a CBE and had an A to Z solution, all in, no other MSPs, no supplier license, no other partners, why would they need to do a joint venture? But according to the law or the interpretation is that CBE, if they were a 100% owned CBE and doing everything A to Z, they still need to do a joint venture to get the lower number. That to me is not necessary.
What do you mean by that?
So if a CBE applies as a Class B and has its own technology, has everything under that one company, is 100% doing it as a CBE, according to the law, to get the lower fee, the lower license fee of $25,000, they still have to do a joint venture. That makes, with all due respect, it makes no sense, right? Because the law is talking about 50%. It's 100%. So a CBE operating by itself or in partnership with another CBE should not have to go through that certification process. They're already a certified CBE. We went through that process and did it anyways. I'm just giving you an example that underscores this idea that I don't think anybody really believed there would be two CBEs that would partner together to do everything under the sun. I think the notion has always been that there's a CBE local bar, local business, and they partner with Ellis. They partner with PointsBet. They partner with Caesars. They partner with GameBet. They partner with whatever. Those are all foreign companies. They're not CBEs. So this notion that we could do better for CBEs, because that is what the spirit of the law was written as. It was meant to help all businesses that are CBEs, not just restaurants, bars, or whatever, and help create business models with foreign companies.
So this is really about the fee associated
I would
with it. Like there's a lower fee associated with joint venture. So that's the only way you can take advantage of it, but not necessarily.
It's an
Okay.
example of kind of this notion that that's one advantage you get from being a CBE, but you still had to go through the same process, because I don't think anybody who wrote the law or the current regulations kind of think about, oh, what if two CBEs do this together?
I think a lot of the thought was, how do you have larger corporations that are already doing it come into the district, and then there's capacity building. You have local companies that need to learn the sports betting business in order to get the capacity to be able to provide the technology. But I think what we're learning is, for a company like yours, they have the capacity already to do
Sure.
it.
And I would actually argue with that a little bit, because I think there is an important capacity building program. That's great. But remember I mentioned 316.
Right.
What capacity building has any of the large tech providers offered me? What conversations have there been? Recruitment, services, procurement opportunities? Nothing, right? And the flip side of the capacity building is, we're competitors at the end of the day. I think that might be pejorative to say that a large foreign company can come in and teach me something about a business that I'm operating in, right?
Cool.
And then more, I think, to that point is the spirit of the law was to help local businesses. To say that we're going to invite foreign businesses into DC to build capacity, to me, that's just giving them a better opportunity for market entry. And I'm all for competition, but at the same time, by saying only foreign companies can come and teach DC companies things, I think is maybe missing the
So
mark.
do you
somewhere.
have any background in the sports wagering industry, or is this something that you're learning right now? Or
We're all learning, but I do have a background in economics and exchanges. And so one of the pieces of our technology is exchange trading, which is permitted under the law. And so that's one of our platforms. But we're trying to roll out a different product in DC for obvious reasons. But the reality is, I could always learn more. But at the same time, I don't think no one's knocking on my door to build capacity or create partnerships, because we're very much competitors, and that's okay. I'm all for competition, but at the same time, you also have to look at the business models that they're bringing to DC.
Right.
And those business models have been effectively rejected by most local businesses because they're not profitable.
Right.
So if you take that in mind and you say, okay, well, there are DC companies that are creating better business models that are more attractive, but if we lower these standards on the mix, or if we create special rules for them, my goodness, this industry could actually expand.
So I will add that, so the larger companies that are here are doing capacity building. So it's a part of every CDE plan that we receive it's a requirement that they present a capacity building plan, which we that, and it's a part of their annual check that we do to see what it is that they're doing. So that could be a host of things from mentor, mentee, protege
Yep.
programs that they're doing, bringing those CBEs into their actual operations, and showing and demonstrating like how are they gaining expertise in the CBE for how they're serving the bug, as well as DSWD and OLG have a complete plan that they work bi-weekly on to discuss the ways in which capacity is being built. I think that it could be useful, like you're saying now, to know what is it that CBEs that are trying to enter the market need, because we can then require, and we do, require the larger companies and say like, hey, well, part of your capacity building plan, this is the need in DC. How can you fulfill it? And so if you have any comments on like what are your needs or other CBEs needs.
Well, I would say, I'll say three things to that. One, I think that the capacity building is good for people who want to be an operator. Not necessarily for me, because I'm a tech provider, so it wouldn't necessarily apply to me. So I'm not saying that someone who wants to partner with a sports restaurant or a bar doesn't need capacity. Well, that's great, and they have more capacity to do that than me, right? So that's great. I'm not commenting on that. What I'm talking about is for the other licensed suppliers and other things. Like I said, I mean, they're not looking to partner with me. There's no matchmaking events. And I've tried a little bit with the SLBD and with OLG to do that, but there's not a huge. I think the capacity building is for operators, not necessarily for tech providers or other industry participants. The second thing I would say is that I was just up at the SWART conference in Maryland, and there were three panelists. There was Ellis, there was PointsBet, and there was BetMGM. And effectively, there was a whole room of small businesses listening to them. The reality is that I think most people figured out that they were competitors to these small businesses, even though they were telling to partner. And all three of them, to a man, said, this business is hard to get into. The barriers to entry are very high. Be careful. And those warnings were good because they are very high because of the current standards. And it's not for everybody. It's a volume business. And if you can't do the volume, don't get into it. That didn't seem, I think a lot of them would say the same thing here in DC. So building that capacity is not necessarily the end solution. In fact, the best way to build that capacity is to tell them the truth, that it might not be the best idea. And what does that do? It just, again, limits the competition for them to, gain more volume, gain more industry share, because that's the name of the game. So I recognize that all of those things are true, and those things, are great opportunities, but I think they're exclusive for people who want to get into it. But then once they realize all the barriers to entry, there's nothing the big businesses can do to train them to get over that, because the business models that they're presenting are rev shares, where the sports book or the sports bar takes all the risk.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just limited to the operator. So we're looking at all facets of individuals that are serving on the sports book. So that could be security and surveillance.
Of course, yeah.
They are still entering the market if you're
Of
a
course.
tech company. So there may be opportunities to infuse you and pair you with one of these larger companies, and get you some opportunities there, maybe as a subcontractor.
We
So,
welcome any and all opportunities. And
Yeah,
I think one of them
imagine.
I think I've tried with OLG and GameBet and Intralot, and I think there opportunities abound in this industry, and we're going to break into it one way or the other. I mean, we're going to apply, we're moving forward, but I just wanted you to get that perspective from us, so that when you do create the rules, you think about us in terms of how does this affect a small business, how does it affect a CBE, how does this affect the growth of the industry, and let's think of a common sense approach that could get more hurdles cleared. I took a lot more time.
No, that's
No,
fine. Let me
very-
just check, just make sure. Any,
I have a couple of comments.
Sure.
One, I think Ty did address it, but as far as capacity building, all CBs required to put in their plan. So in fiscal year 2020, we had 5 capacity building events, and in fiscal year 2021, we had 4. So those things are out there. We're publicizing them constantly. So that's the first thing. As I've learned from my boss, Peter, this is a highly regulated industry. And the reason why it is so that it's beneficial to all businesses that enter it. And we constantly let people know this isn't for the faint.
Nope.
And so I applaud you for wanting to get into this industry. and I hope that you're successful. The other thing is, you mentioned earlier in your comments that you are in the process of getting BMM certification and applying as a supplier, but during the conversation, you talked about being a Class B applicant. So I'm not really sure how you're going about this process. If you could clarify that.
So the connection is simple. If you're a supplier with a BMM GLI 33 certification and you have no Class B clients, what are you? So I mean, yes, we're a supplier. We're not a bookmaker. But if we don't have any interest from a Class B because the hurdles are so high, I just spent $10,000 on a supplier license, and that's it.
So your concern with the Class B requirements is to make sure there are enough of them out there.
Yeah.
So you have clients. Customers.
I know you've had a lot of applicants, but you have one licensee, but that's a cash business.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have a lot of uptake. So I understand for your comment about this is a highly regulated industry, but if the regulations are Nevada-based, meant for win, you're not going to have a lot of interest from Class Bs because they look at the regulations. We've looked at them together, and they say we can't comply. So we've created a solution that helps them comply. And I mentioned the beacons as a technology that is a hurdle that we've gotten over. That's an example that we had to go around the mix, come up with a tech solution that would comply with BMM, comply with OLG mix standards. But should that have been the case from the get-go, if we're making new rules, which is the purpose of this meeting, perhaps we can, on paper, show that the barriers are a little bit lower and more common sense for Class Bs. Because if I don't, Class A's has shown that they only want to participate and partner with large foreign companies. So, you know, they haven't been looking for businesses like us. Maybe they didn't know we're out there. But I'm just saying, to your point, if you don't have any Class Bs, then what was the point of getting a license?
And just curious, and it certainly, it's my next question. It's beyond the scope of this roundtable, but the fees. If the Class B fee were just lowered from 100,000 to 25,000, do you think that would be the solution?
No, but I don't. I mean, statutory wise, it's there, but it should be zero. I mean, the fees are an obstacle. The reality is OLG and DC should promote sports wagering, and GGR, you get a 10% tax that's paid to you. Why shouldn't you want that as, you know, why shouldn't you want more Class Bs who are employing more people, doing more revenue, selling more third party or ancillary services and goods and services? That's what you want to do. You want to lower the bar so more people can get into this within reason. You don't want anybody and everybody doing this. You want people who are experienced, who can do this, and who've shown an interest and a willingness to comply with mix. But just create a middle ground or meet us in the middle in terms of creating rules or creating special avenues. And I gave you the idea, if you can't get around the fee, allow them to apply mix compliance cost against the renewal fee. You know, that's an idea where you could say, hey, we spent, you know, X amount of money on this. So then when you do apply for the renewal or whatever, you've shown a good faith effort over 5 years to comply. You know, that it's just a common sense approach of saying, let's create an industry that's more profitable for Class Bs and easier to get into. So 25,000, 100,000, 50,000 renewal, employment fees, AML requirements, geolocation service. It gets to the point where they say, forget it.
So if you've listened to some of our oversight hearings, you probably are
Sure.
aware that our funding for regulation only comes from the license fees. So we don't see any of the tax revenue from the gross gaming revenue that goes to the general revenue fund. It does not go through our books. There is a cost to regulation, so we have to figure out, you know, a funding mechanism. If we drop the license fees, then what is the funding mechanism to conduct a regulatory activity? It's something we'll have.
Yeah, and I
figure out
can't speak
work
to
out.
that because that's your own budgetary things, but I would
Right.
think that, you know, a lot of the compliance stuff is on the business itself, and then you guys are kind of the regulatory check against that. You know, hopefully the Class A's could pay for it because they get special treatment. I'm just saying that what special treatment do the Class B's get beyond the lower fee, but that's for a CBE. So if you look at the mix, you look at the regulations, you look at the law, there's a lot of favoritism for Class A, not so much for Class B, and especially I don't think there's a lot for CBEs written into the regulations. Like I mentioned, Section 316 talks about that, but it's not in the mix. It's not in the Title 30. So I can't speak to your budget, but I was just saying for Class Bs, if the idea is to promote the industry, create more jobs, create more applicants, create more buzz, lowering standards, lowering fees, lowering obstacles to entry, I think is something we should take a strong look at.
Any additional questions or comments from the panel?
Thanks.
Thank you
All
for
right.
taking
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just because that went, it was a good discussion. I enjoyed the discussion on that, Mr. Kennedy there. We're just now going to take just a quick 5-minute break. Okay. Let's let the record reflect that okay, we'll get started again. Let the record reflect we're back from our break. It's 11:04, and we have our last speaker for the day, and I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself.
Good morning, Director. Good morning, everyone at the OLG. I'm Floyd Baroga. I'm Vice President of Product Compliance for Caesars Entertainment. I just want to thank everyone for welcoming me here for the roundtable, and it's great to see, as a former regulator, allowance as far as the licensees, public comment, and giving everyone the opportunity to provide input on any mix, any regulations, and it's a great forum, whether you're a small business or BetMGM or Caesars, to allow that opportunity for discussion and open forum. So I appreciate it. Today, I'm here to discuss a couple items within the OLG minimum internal controls, particularly related to ticket branding and cash drawer monitoring in relation to the GLI 33 standards and the internal controls regarding those particular items. So Caesars does plan to incorporate our new system, and the particular requirements that I want to highlight are OLG Mix 10.7.2 winning ticket and voucher redemption, as well as 12.5.2 back office platform. And our system that we plan on incorporating at Capital One Arena in a couple months is GLI 33 and GLI 20 compliant, and it is live in over 13 regulated jurisdictions that adopts those GLI standards, such as the OLG does, both in state, tribal, as well as lottery jurisdictions. So whether it's our current implementation of the CBS platform at Capital One Arena, or our new implementation, our latest and greatest platform, if you will, called the Liberty platform, both of those systems are GLI compliant and comply with the technical regulations adopted by the OLG. So what I want to highlight in section of the mix 10.7.2, winning ticket and voucher redemption, is particularly section E, and it states, upon scanning the ticket/voucher, the sports wagering system brands the ticket voucher with a paid designation, the amount of payment, and date. Alternatively, if an employee manually enters or scans the ticket/voucher number into the sports wagering system, the employee either immediately writes/stamps the date, amount of payment, and a paid designation on the player's ticket voucher, or attaches to the players a copy of the paid ticket, which indicates a paid designation, the ticket and voucher number, and the amount of payment and date. So in relation to the GLI technical standards and that particular requirement, that requirement has been adopted as a legacy internal control from Nevada Gaming. And, that was implemented a long time before you had any of the technology incorporated into the sports wagering industry. And with the new systems that are offered by, whether it's a Caesars or a smaller company, they incorporate, real-time mechanisms to track back office reporting, so that it minimizes human input, right, or human errors, because the system will automatically generate the amount paid for any particular ticket or voucher, and requiring a ticket writer to manually write down those items creates situations where it can possibly make human errors, and also it creates instances where it places operations in compromising positions. Say there's a World Series game, or there's a NCAA tournament game at Capital One Arena, and you have 50 or 100 people in line. If it takes additional time for those ticket writers to manually write down, okay, here's your paid designation, here's your date, and your value paid to the player, that'll increase the time as far as servicing that player, as well as, you know, if it takes 1 minute for one player and there's 20 people in line, that person at the very end is going to have a substantial waiting time as far as when they can have their paid ticket. They can miss the game. They can have a bad experience and want to go to across the river, say to, you know, another sports wagering book in Maryland or another jurisdiction. So really what Caesars is requesting for that particular item is, in the spirit of the requirements, if the system has ability to identify the ticket or the voucher as a paid designation within the system itself instantly, we modify that internal controls as far as the manual process, as well as offering a technology solution to meet the spirit of the regulation. The next minimum internal control that I have for reference is 12.5.2 back office platform, and it particularly states in section B, the back office platform shall allow the monitoring and reading of reports for significant events in order to guarantee direct scrutiny of conditions directed and reported by the sports wagering equipment. Among them, the manipulation or alteration of locally stored data, malfunctions, the opening of the SSBT access door to the currency cassettes or cash storage boxes. And then this particular section is, or the unauthorized opening of the ticket writer terminal drawer. So the Liberty retail system that we plan to install at Capital One, our system does not identify the opening or the closing of the ticket drawer. That system is live in 13 jurisdictions and adheres to all those jurisdictions' internal controls. And Caesars incorporates, whether it's camera coverage or at the beginning of shifts, as far as providing our ticket writers with the keys. There's a full vetted internal control process that we have at Capital One Arena that follows all the access, if you will, to that drawer. And any transactions that a player and a ticket writer incorporates into the system will be tracked in real time, and it allows the OOG to have a facility of auditability, whether it's a ticket writer one, a supervisor, or a manager. We can provide the facility to audit all the transactions, whether it's accepting cash, paying out a player for any winnings for tickets, whether it was purchased at the SSBT or at the TWT. So, you know, with that said, if we can have another implementation that states other technology solutions that meet the spirit of the regulations and that provides a facility for auditability, that's what Caesars would like to request, and, you know, identify any questions regarding our system or what we've done in other markets to adhere to those type of requirements.
On that issue, so when you say other technologies, and maybe I missed this because we're talking about the cash drawer of ticket writer, correct?
Correct.
And so when you're saying other systems, are you talking about that it's under like 24 hours surveillance, that somebody in the surveillance room is looking at the ticket writer and can see what they're doing in terms of the transactions, opening the drawer, closing the drawer? Is that and that's what you have implemented in other jurisdictions as part of the overall security of the cash drawer?
Correct. So as far as the security cash drawer, we identify separate keys for each cash drawer, right? So that path, those keys are identified and secured in the vault, so that regardless of where those keys go, anytime it leaves that vault, you're going to have camera coverage from the vault all the way as far as the ticket writer going back to the teller terminal. So regardless, you'll have access and can review based off of checking out the keys per shift, where the access is to that cache, or who has the responsibility for that cache, as well as camera coverage of the sportsbook itself, there's going to be a camera there at all times covering any opening and closing of the door if there's any exchanges of cash, as well as tying back that information back to the system. So if we needed to audit based off a particular ticket, a gaming day, or an event, all that information can tie back to the amount of cash that is actually in that cash drawer.
Okay, great. Thank you for that explanation. Do any of my colleagues have a question regarding the?
So I guess on 10.7.2, what you're saying is your system tracks when the tickets get paid, so there's no reason to have. If somebody tried to rescan that ticket, it would just show up as previously paid in your system.
Correct.
Are you concerned about tickets getting back out into the population after they've been cashed, and then having difficulties with customers who try to cash them again? And you're saying it's been previously cashed, and he's saying no, it hasn't.
So as soon as that ticket or voucher is cashed by the system, that system automatically updates in real time. And
Right.
if there's any attempts to recache that ticket at a later date or another location, the entire system would have real-time updates so that that ticket would correlate to any SSBT, any teller terminal station, so that there is no duplicate payouts of.
Well, it's not duplicate payups I'm worried about. It's upset customers who claim, well, I've got this winning ticket,
Mhm.
and there's nothing on the ticket that shows it's being previously paid. But your ticket writer or your person is saying it's been previously paid, and then you have some type of dispute.
So then you would have the ability for that ticket writer to determine when that payout occurred. You can, if it gets to the point, you can go back to surveillance coverage for that particular day and identify and show who actually paid that out. And it would be based off that ticket, you can tie it back to the individual paying that out to the player, whether it's
Right. And it's all time date stamped, so you can go back to the exact timing.
correct.
Yeah, on the same note, we discussed this internally with GLI for the interpretation of that. I think we're on the same thought process of that. When a person does scan their ticket and that Liberty system tracks it, that's good enough under the interpretation, and GLI was under the same conclusion too. I think it's just a tweak to the language to signal what you just spoke about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that this is the distinction between the SSBT or the TWT, or was it both?
I think it was both. Yeah, I was just verifying that because we had those discussions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll follow up on that, Floyd, for that specific one for 10.7.2, because that was a long conversation with GLI.
Thank you.
Good. No, I don't think we have any more questions. Any additional comment?
Oh no, just appreciate the time and thank you for hearing my comments. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you. Appreciate
Floyd.
it. And just a reminder to everyone who gave testimony today, it would be helpful. Again, if you submit it in writing, as all of us were up here taking notes, and sometimes our notes are our interpretation of what we were hearing. Want to make sure that if you submit it in writing, then we have a better understanding of exactly what you were telling us, your testimony. And so as we start the process of drafting the proposed rules, we have a better understanding and can take that into your testimony into consideration into the proposed rules. Okay. All right. And having said that, I'll defer to the panel here if there's any questions from that you have of any of the speakers.
I think more for Mr. Kennedy, just in your
Okay.
write-up to the OLG.
Mr. Kennedy, if you
Oh,
can
you
come
can
back up to
come.
the podium.
Yeah, sorry about that. In your write-up to the OLG, just make sure you're very detailed in what you proposed today, because it was all great points you brought up, right? Specifically the technology that you're providing. So whether that's the actual sportsbook operations or the platform that you want to provide to Class Bs, right? And as we spoke a little bit about the different categories that the company potentially fit in, you want to apply for a supplier license because you are supplying a technology. But when you go into the services of a sports actually wagering operation that might bump you into the MSP category. So that's something that you might want to discuss with us later on. Just to make
Sure.
sure you're applying to the right licensure.
I'll
category.
make a comment on that because I do think the difference between supplier and MSPs and Class B get a little blurred in
Yeah.
between each one. So I'll give you my commentary and you can take it for what it's worth. But yeah, I gave you a couple examples today, but I think we have about 6 or 7 maybe. So I'll cite them by code.
Yeah, and detailed also on the technology that you have when it comes to beacons too, so that that could come to light for us. What you have implemented, and also
Sure.
perhaps since you're in the tech world, other capabilities that other potential Class Bs could use, like Wi-Fi or just something of that sort.
Sure.
So
Actually,
that-
I think the regs actually cite specific technologies in it, so we can give you additional ones or different ones that
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
should be
Yeah,
better
so-
reflected.
that'd
I
be
think the
great.
regs just give examples of what may be out there.
That's correct. Yeah. And
Yeah.
we get a little nervous about the capitalized geolocation system, so we
Right.
didn't know if that was how it's actually interpreted.
And
as
of course, in
this.
this industry, the technology is moving so
That's
fast
right.
that we don't want to get behind on our
Right,
regulations because it
Yeah.
takes a while to
Yeah.
keep them up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So any recommendations you have, just put them on paper. We'll
Sure,
take a look
we'll
at
do.
it. Appreciate it.
A quick question for our legal counsel here is, when they submit the written comments, are the written comments confidential, or what if they contain proprietary information, or should they exclude any proprietary information or trade secret information from those comments?
In general, the comments are public, and we will probably post those on our website. If you have something that's confidential that you'd like to give us, I think you can give those to us separately, and be sure to mark it proprietary and confidential. We are subject to the district's FOIA law,
Sure.
and so
No, I don't think we would provide anything proprietary, but I think to Luis's point, I think we would separate our comments from statutory, regulatory, and from the mix and the Title 30, and then if just a background letter, I think we could provide in terms of just the general business model and technologies that we're
that'd be
applying.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, at this moment, since there's no more comments from the panel, I certainly would give our 3 the speakers today one last opportunity if they want to say anything. This would be the time. No? All right. Having seen no one taking that opportunity, I think we'll go ahead and close. The time is now 11:21 a.m. and this public roundtable is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.